the headlines, the issues impacting you, all on This Week in Cincinnati on 9 on your side.
Welcome back to This Week in Cincinnati. I'm Craig McKee. Former U.S. Attorney Benjamin Glassman was one of the most important leaders in law enforcement in our area. He left that office at the beginning of this month. Glassman is a Cincinnati area native. He became the U.S. Attorney, by the way, for the Southern District of Ohio back in 2016. Now, in that role, he was the lead federal prosecutor for Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus. Benjamin Glassman joins us now for a discussion. So you've been out of your job now for just a short period of time. For those at home who don't know, I mean, they've seen you during news conferences, and we've had clips, obviously, in a number of stories here. Kind of explain kind of the broad range of cases that really fall into your lap.
Yeah. So the U.S. Attorney is the chief federal law enforcement official for whatever district he or she sits in. So for us, the Southern District of Ohio is the whole southern half of the state, 48 counties. If you draw a line right above Columbus, all 48 counties, including Hamilton, Montgomery, and Franklin, as you mentioned. 5.7 million people are in that area that we serve, and really we represent the United States in any matter that could possibly get into federal court. So we represent the United States. A lot of people don't know in civil matters. We defend officers and agencies of the United States. We enforce federal civil rights laws and federal anti-fraud laws. And then what most people are aware of is federal criminal investigation and prosecution, which is probably about 3/4 of what the office does. And that is almost anything that you can imagine.
I mean, we've seen you on from opioids to human trafficking to mass shootings. I mean, really, it's a broad range.
To include hate crimes and national security, human trafficking, gun trafficking, child exploitation, public corruption. There's the book of federal crimes is about that thick. So
and you have it all memorized, right?
That's right.
If we can, let's talk about the Fifth Third shooting. When that happened, when the news starts breaking on that, what is your initial reaction? Do you immediately jump into action in your role, or what was your former role?
Well, the first thing is to try to assess the situation, and we are fortunate here in Cincinnati and throughout the Southern District of Ohio that we have really close working relationships between federal, state, and local law enforcement partners. So even as soon as I became aware of the situation, I knew that Cincinnati police had already responded, was on scene.
Right.
I knew that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was there to assist them. So I was getting reports immediately as to what was going on, whether the situation was ongoing or whether it had been contained, and what role we could play. So always from a federal perspective, our role in response to something like that is not to just jump in and muck everything up, but to try to make sure that we are providing the right kind of support to the local first responders. And in this case, the Cincinnati police did a fantastic job.
Obviously, there are cases, gun trafficking cases that you guys come across. We've done reports talking about the thoroughfare of I-75 and the routes for both drugs and guns, and they're going from here to Chicago or what have you. Can you stop the problem? I think it's one thing for you to have a news conference and say, look at all these faces, look at all these people we put behind bars or we've indicted, and we've taken X amount of guns off the streets. Is that a drop in the bucket from what you saw while you were in office? Is that just a small speck of really a larger problem?
Was definitely a larger problem, and it's not the sort of thing that you can ever stop completely, which is why you can't really, it doesn't make sense from my perspective to have a war on drugs or a war on crime. These are public health and safety problems that you've got to try to address as best as you can, and enforcement is one aspect of addressing problems like that. And yes, I do think that when we announce indictments against a number of people, it's not just for the sake of making an announcement. It's because we are actually trying to disrupt organizations, remove those people who have a disproportionate responsibility for violence in Cincinnati and elsewhere, or for drug trafficking. And by reducing, by taking those people off the streets and by disrupting those organizations, you give all of the other organizations that are outside law enforcement the opportunity to try to mitigate that harm on an ongoing basis. So it's not just law enforcement, it's all of us working together.
Do you think the laws are strict enough for the cartels and the dealers, and from guns to drug dealers both, Are they strict enough, or do you think the federal government needs to take a review of really the policies and laws that are in place right now?
Generally speaking, I think that we have the right tools to address drug trafficking, and certainly when we're talking about violent crime, we generally speaking have very strong tools, statutory tools that we can use with our federal law enforcement partners working together with our state and local partners. There are some areas that we need to take a closer look at. So, for example, we've talked about the problem you've mentioned already of shootings in public places, mass shootings, mass violence. I know that conversations are ongoing about how to best address that as a general problem, but certainly that's one area where we need to really think about what kind of comprehensive strategy can we as a country come up with to try to reduce the incidence of those kinds of problems. And it's a similar sort of thing with domestic terrorism. So right now, we've got a robust enforcement mechanism for international terrorism. We have tools that we can use to try to disrupt domestic terrorism, but they're not analogous. And so I do think that we need to keep thinking about whether or not we've got the right tools to stop those problems.
All right, our conversation will continue right after the break.